Hi, my name is Brooklyn, and my sister didn't just lie, she discarded my life. She took the one thing keeping my body from shutting down and dropped it into a trash chute on a plane. Then told everyone I was just being dramatic. The captain called my name over the intercom, and in that split second, the panic on her face said everything. But what hurts more than losing $18,000 worth of meds at 35,000 feet is realizing your own family's been rewriting your story for years. What else had she thrown away that no one saw? My name's Brooklyn Maris, and I don't like attention. I never have. I'm the kind of person who apologizes when someone else bumps into me. I say sorry when I sneeze too loud. When I cry in public, I apologize to the air itself, as if my emotions were somehow breaking the peace. That's what made what happened on that flight so unbearable. Because it wasn't just the pain. It wasn't even the $18,000 worth of medication that vanished like it meant nothing. It was that I was made small. Again. In front of strangers. By my own sister. We were headed to San Francisco for what was supposed to be a hopeful visit. A specialist clinic. A new round of experimental treatment. I hadn't felt this anxious and excited in years. The sky outside the small airplane window looked like it belonged in a postcard. That dusty blue kind of peace only Colorado skies know how to give you. But inside my body, a storm had begun to stir. I shifted in my seat, trying not to show the stiffness in my legs, the tightness in my arms. I could feel the flare-up starting, like a silent alarm only I could hear. "Celine," I said under my breath, my voice already tightening, "can you get the gray pouch from my bag?" My sister didn't move at first. She was staring at her phone, lips pursed like she'd just read something distasteful. "The meds," I added softer. "It's time." She sighed. Not dramatically, not even loudly, just enough to cut. Enough to let me know she wasn't thrilled. With a measured motion, she reached down, retrieved the pouch, and handed it over like it was something distasteful. Her eyes didn't even meet mine. I bit down the familiar urge to thank her anyway. Opening the pouch, I pulled out one of the preloaded syringes. It was chilled, just as it needed to be, resting between the two gel packs. My hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the creeping fatigue in my muscles. A flight attendant passed our row just then. I looked up, attempting a polite smile. "Excuse me, could I get some water?" She nodded, began to reach for a plastic cup, but then Celine's voice came out, louder than necessary. "She's fine. She does this." She let out a breathy laugh. "Always when the spotlight's not on her, she's just being dramatic." I froze. The attendant looked at me, then back at Celine, unsure what to make of the dynamic. Other heads turned. I could feel their eyes, the unspoken judgment. I wanted to disappear into the floor. "She's on medication," I tried to explain. It's for a condition." Celine leaned toward the attendant, voice lowered just enough for me to still hear. "She gets like this when she thinks no one's paying attention. I'm her sister. Trust me." Trust me. Two words that, coming from her, always meant the opposite. The attendant nodded awkwardly and moved on. My hands had gone cold. I placed the syringe back into the pouch with slow, deliberate care. "I'll take that up front," Celine said suddenly, reaching over. "Let me explain it to them properly so there's no confusion." I blinked. "No, Celine, it's fine. I don't need help." She smiled, that plastic, performative smile she'd perfected since we were kids. "Let me. I know how to talk to people." Before I could stop her, she had the pouch in her hand and was striding toward the front galley. I watched her back retreat down the narrow aisle. I wanted to follow, to scream, to demand, but I sat frozen, 100 memories of being silenced bearing down on my chest. Seconds passed, a minute, maybe two. Then I saw her, just barely visible through the open curtain. She opened the trash chute, and with a flick of her wrist, she dropped it in. I didn't even hear the sound. I felt it. like the pressure change when a plane hits turbulence. But inside my lungs, my stomach turned. I couldn't breathe. A gray insulated pouch. My entire medical supply for the week. My lifeline. Gone. Like trash. She just... I couldn't even finish the sentence. She threw it away. I gripped the armrest. My chest tightened. My jaw clenched, holding back everything that wanted to come out. The scream, the sob, the fury. The flight crew turned to her. She was already speaking, her hands moving gently, like she was explaining a complicated situation at a conference. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. I had no oxygen left, just betrayal. Then, the overhead speaker crackled to life. Passenger Brooklyn Maris, please remain seated. A medical staff will meet you upon landing. The cabin shifted. Eyes turned. I felt a ripple in the air. That's when Celine's confidence cracked, just for a second. Celine's mask didn't fall right away. It flickered, like static on a screen that hadn't quite lost its signal. Her lips curled into that tight, controlled smile she wore anytime she needed to look like the calm, rational one. To anyone glancing from a distance, she looked concerned, compassionate even. But I knew better. I'd known that look since I was 12. The flight attendant gave her a short nod before disappearing toward the front. Celine turned to me then, eyes sharp but mouth soft. "You okay?" she asked, like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just tossed my meds down the trash chute and gaslit me in front of an entire cabin. I didn't answer. Instead, I closed my eyes and let my mind drift, away from the recycled air and the choked-back nausea in my throat, into memories I hadn't dared touch in a long time. Florida, 3 years ago. I'd booked that trip on my own, using my savings, finally determined to see a specialist without Celine hovering. She insisted on coming, just in case. I was too tired to fight her. Somehow at the airport, my insulated cooler never made it onto the plane. Celine swore she'd loaded it herself. Maybe TSA flagged it, she'd offered, shrugging. She looked genuinely baffled. I remember feeling guilty for even suspecting otherwise. Then Denver. Last year. Hotel room, sleek, minimalist, perfect for Instagram. Celine had brought me tea while I lay half-curled on the bed, joints flaring like they were wrapped in fire. She told me to rest, that she'd handle packing the meds back into the fridge. The next morning, the pouch was missing. "Must have gotten tossed by housekeeping," she said. "Don't look at me like that, Brooklyn." Both times, I told myself these things happen. Travel gets chaotic. Mistakes are made. But this time, I watched her do it. And still, I felt my brain reaching for some rational explanation, some softer version of the truth that didn't make my own sister a deliberate threat to my life. There was a reason for that, and it had nothing to do with logic. It had everything to do with what I'd been taught growing up. "You need to stop making everything about you, Brooklyn." That's what my mother used to say. Every time I cried after physical therapy, every time I needed help getting up from the couch, every time I asked for anything that required Celine to slow down for half a second. "You think the world owes you comfort?" she once asked me over dinner. I was 16. My hand trembled as I tried to hold a fork steady. Celine works twice as hard and doesn't complain. I remember Celine glancing up from her plate, chewing slowly. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The silence did all the work for her. That was the real pattern. It wasn't just lost meds or fake concern. It was decades of being made to feel like my very existence was inconvenient. Now, on this flight, with the pain beginning to spike and my body begging for the drug that was no longer there, I realized how deep the damage went. My jaw clenched. My fingers curled around my phone, the plastic case digging into my palm. I pulled up the airline's app, navigated to the medical assistance section. The words on the screen blurred slightly, then snapped back into focus. "Medical alert submission. Describe incident." I typed, then deleted, then typed again. "She destroyed my medication. I'm in pain. This was deliberate." I hovered over the send button, thumb trembling, not from weakness, but from the old reflex to not make waves. Across the aisle, a man coughed. Behind me, a child laughed, oblivious. The world kept spinning. But I wasn't dramatic. Not this time. I hit send. The screen blinked. Confirmation. Response activated. Celine leaned toward me, the smile returning to her voice before her face. "You're not going to ruin this trip, Brooklyn. Not again." I looked at her. Really looked. She still believed she was in control. She still believed I would fold. But for the first time, I didn't shrink. She looked caught off script. That's the best way I can describe it. Like someone whose teleprompter just glitched mid-sentence. Her eyes darted toward mine, then quickly away. A pause too long. A breath too calculated. If you didn't know Selene like I did, you might think she was just shaken out of concern. But I saw it. That flicker. The smallest glitch in her performance. The flight attendant didn't return right away. She'd gone toward the cockpit, and from the tension in Celine's posture, I knew that unsettled her more than anything I'd said. She leaned back in her seat, adjusted her cardigan like she always did when she needed to regain composure, then pulled out her phone. Scrolled. Pretended to text. Anything to re-anchor herself in the image she curated so tightly. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Just like she hated it. Because silence, when intentional, is loud. My body, however, was not quiet. The stiffness in my neck had traveled to my shoulders and was now nesting deep in my spine. It wasn't the worst flare-up I'd had, but it was rising, like water slowly creeping toward your throat. And the one thing that kept it from overflowing was now inside a waste chute lined with soda cans and sandwich wrappers. I shifted slightly in my seat, trying to stretch my legs, but space was tight. Not as bad as last year, though. That flight, Selene had kindly offered to switch seats with me at the gate because she said her row had better Wi-Fi. I didn't ask why that mattered on a 2-hour flight. I just nodded and took her ticket without protest. Only after boarding did I realize she'd put me in a cramped window seat in the very back row. Non-reclining, no room to stretch, jammed next to a bathroom with a flickering light. When I asked her about it, she just smiled. "Don't be so sensitive," she said. "You should be grateful I booked anything at all." I remember gripping the armrests that day, biting back tears while trying to inject myself with the biologic as turbulence bounced us around. The woman next to me had offered her ginger ale. I smiled and said, "Thank you." I've gotten good at accepting pity drinks and borrowed grace. That memory, like so many others, bubbled up now, not because I wanted it to, but because trauma doesn't ask for permission. I reached into my bag, tucked deep inside a side pocket, folded 3 times to keep the edges from tearing, was a letter. The envelope had yellowed slightly, corners bent from years of travel. I never mailed it, never meant to, really. It was to my dad. He died 8 years ago, pancreatic cancer that moved too fast for any of us to catch up. He was the only person who ever noticed when my pain wasn't visible, who asked how I was even when I smiled too hard, who didn't accuse me of exaggerating just because I needed a moment to sit down. After he passed, I wrote that letter one night when the flare-up had lasted 6 straight days. I was angry. At my body, yes, but also at Selene, at Mom, at myself, for letting them dictate the way I saw my own worth. I never showed anyone, especially not Selene. But now, sitting here, trapped at 35,000 feet, I unfolded it for the first time in years. The handwriting was shaky, smudged in parts, but the words were etched deep in my memory. "I don't need them to carry me, Dad. I just want them to stop calling it a performance. I wish someone would believe me without asking for proof." I pressed the letter against my knee, closed my eyes. It felt like holding a version of myself I'd abandoned years ago. One who still hoped that a carefully worded explanation might finally earn understanding. That girl was gone. But maybe, just maybe, this new version didn't need anyone's permission to exist. A soft voice pulled me back. "Ma'am, can I get you anything?" The attendant was back, her face neutral but attentive. Celine straightened slightly, ready to speak, but I beat her to it. Yes, I said, my voice even, deliberate. I need you to know that my medication was destroyed, not misplaced, not lost. It was deliberately thrown out. Her brows lifted slightly. She glanced at Celine, then back at me. I have a medical condition, I continued. What was in that pouch was not cosmetic. It wasn't optional. It was my treatment, and it's gone. The silence between us stretched. Celine shifted beside me. Brooklyn, let's not make this more. No, I said, cutting her off for the first time in years. The attendant nodded slowly. I understand. I'll report this to the captain. Thank you. No apology, no smile, just facts. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't smoothing anything over. The attendant walked away. Celine sat frozen for a beat, then leaned in, her voice low and clipped. What exactly are you trying to do here? I folded the letter with steady hands, slid it back into my bag. The truth, I said. Just that. She blinked. For once, she didn't know what to say. It was the first time Celine looked unsure of her script. The hush that followed her silence wasn't accidental. It was the kind of quiet that made people uncomfortable, not because there was nothing to say, but because everyone suddenly knew too much. The flight attendant walked with purpose toward the cockpit, disappearing behind the blue curtain like she had a mission to complete. I watched Celine's eyes follow her, a flash of calculation sparking across her face. She shifted in her seat, smoothed her blouse, recrossed her legs, and folded her hands tightly together like she was prepping for a courtroom. For once, I didn't break the silence. Neither did she. Not yet. And then the intercom cracked. Passenger Brooklyn Maris. The captain's voice rang calm but firm. Please remain in your seat. Medical assistance will meet you upon arrival. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. The name echoed through the cabin like a gavel. Clear, direct, final. Celine's face paled. The corners of her mouth twitched like she was about to object, but then she caught herself. A few heads turned. One man up front glanced our way, then leaned closer to the woman beside him. The ripple had begun. That was when Celine leaned sideways, speaking just loud enough for the row behind to hear. She's had flare-ups like this before, she said to no one and everyone. We've been through this. It's not what it looks like. I felt my body tense, but I didn't respond. Not yet. She just gets worked up, Celine added. It's part of her condition. I reached slowly into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened the voice memos. You don't have to do this, she whispered. I ignored her. With one tap, I played a recording. It wasn't today's conversation. It was from last winter, one I'd saved but never shared. Until now. Honestly, I tossed one of the syringes, her voice said through the tiny speaker. Brooklyn was acting unhinged and dramatic, and I didn't think she should have control over those meds when she's like that. The sound wasn't loud, but in the stillness of the plane, every word felt amplified. The row in front of us went rigid. Someone turned. Someone else gasped. Celine's lips parted. That's out of context. I stopped the playback and turned to her, speaking just loud enough to match the volume she had used minutes ago. And this, I said, nodding toward the front of the cabin, is from 10 minutes ago. She blinked twice, mouth tightening. You're trying to destroy me. No, I said evenly. You're just finally not controlling the narrative. Across the aisle, a woman in her 50s muttered under her breath, You don't throw away someone's medicine, no matter what. Celine heard her. I saw it in the way her shoulders curled inward, the way she avoided eye contact. It was subtle, but to me, it was everything. It meant the power had shifted. I breathed slowly through my nose, forcing my hands to relax against my thighs. My pulse was steady now, not calm, but certain. The captain's voice returned overhead. This time, it wasn't for me. Cabin crew, please prepare for descent. Celine turned toward the window. Her reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, older, harsher. Maybe it was just the lighting. Or maybe it was that, for the first time, the role she'd rehearsed her whole life wasn't landing. I sat taller. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time, I wasn't the one defending myself. Now the cabin wasn't just watching, it was witnessing. People don't need a full backstory to understand injustice when they see it. Sometimes all it takes is a look, a tone, or the kind of silence that feels weaponized. That's what was happening. The mood in the plane shifted. No longer a personal conflict, but something everyone in earshot couldn't pretend not to notice. Celine felt it too. She leaned forward with sudden urgency, reaching for my hand like we were still sisters in the traditional sense, like our bond hadn't corroded with years of small betrayals. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said, her voice breaking in practiced waves. "I was scared, Brooklyn. I thought the meds were old. I just didn't want you to get hurt." It was a new script, but her delivery was familiar. Her voice trembled just enough to feel real to someone who didn't know her patterns. But I knew them. She'd used the same act in high school when she cried to avoid consequences for throwing out my medical forms the night before a school trip. Back then, Mom believed her. Teachers did too. I had no proof, just pain. This time, I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away, but I didn't squeeze her hand either. "Sarah!" Selene called out to the nearest flight attendant, who'd been lingering nearby. "I didn't mean any harm. I panicked." The woman stopped mid-step. "That pouch you threw away," she said slowly, "contained a temperature-controlled medical biologic, correct?" Celine didn't answer right away. "I didn't think it was that serious," she finally muttered. Sarah nodded, her expression unreadable. "Just so we're clear, that's classified as a sealed medical device. It's not something we discard casually." Celine's shoulders tensed. "I was just trying to protect her. You don't know what she's like sometimes." My jaw clenched, but I didn't speak. Instead, I opened the flight app on my phone and pulled up my reservation history. A few taps later, I turned the screen towards Sarah. "This was a refill trip I booked 3 months ago," I explained. "Paid for with my own money. Celine called the clinic behind my back, said the family had a scheduling conflict and that I wouldn't make it. She canceled the appointment and rerouted my flight." Sarah leaned in slightly, reading the confirmation emails and the time-stamped message from the clinic. "That wasn't concern," I said quietly. "That was control." That's when the woman across the aisle stood up. She had silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and wore an old denim jacket that didn't match her luggage or her quiet confidence. "I saw her toss the pouch," she said clearly. "I was watching the whole thing. She looked around first, like she knew it wasn't right. I recorded it." Celine whipped her head toward her. "You don't even know us." "I don't need to," the woman replied calmly. "I'm a nurse. Was, anyway. 32 years in trauma." That look on her face when she did it wasn't confusion, it was intent. She held up her phone, screen paused mid-motion. The moment Celine extended her arm, hovering the pouch above the chute. "My name's Minerva Quaid," she added, "and I'll be giving a full statement." Celine's face drained of color. For the first time, I could see the veneer crack, not just in expression, but in posture. She sagged slightly, her hands folded into her lap. She was preparing for damage control. "Look," she began, voice softer now. "This is a misunderstanding. A bad judgment call maybe, but—" Sarah raised her hand. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to take this footage to the captain. Stay in your seat." Celine tried to speak again, but Sarah had already turned, walking toward the galley, phone in hand. As she disappeared behind the curtain, Celine looked around. Her eyes scanned the cabin, hoping, no, pleading, for someone to defend her. No one did. That didn't stop her from trying. "You people don't get it," she muttered, loud enough for Minerva and 2 nearby passengers to hear. "You don't know what she puts this family through. She manipulates. Always has." Minerva didn't blink. Her voice was steady, almost gentle. I understand enough. The air grew heavier. It wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was exposure, uncontrolled, unfiltered, undeniable. No more whispered doubts or gaslit versions of events. Now it was all out in the open, and I didn't have to say a word. The curtain wasn't just falling on her story, it was rising on mine. The moment Sarah spoke those words, "You will be escorted on landing," Celine stopped blinking. Her mouth remained slightly open, as if her next line had vanished mid-air. She looked at me like I had become unrecognizable. And in a way, I had. I wasn't bracing for the fallout anymore. I wasn't folding myself into the corners of our family dynamic just to make room for her performance. For the first time, I wasn't scared of being heard. Sarah moved quietly down the aisle, passing a young woman with pink-tinted hair who had a phone positioned just below eye level. She didn't look away when Sarah walked by. She just adjusted the angle and kept streaming. A whisper floated from 2 rows ahead. 70,000 people, someone murmured, and counting. I glanced across the aisle. A teenage boy was showing his phone screen to his father, both of them watching the live stream unfold in real time. Celine noticed. Her eyes flitted from one pair of strangers to the next. Her hands reached for the edges of the tray table, anchoring to something, anything. "You're really doing this to me?" she said under her breath. "Brooklyn, we're family." I didn't answer, not yet. The captain's voice filled the cabin once again, measured, but tinged with a formality that told everyone on board this was no routine flight. Due to an onboard medical concern and internal investigation, we are alerting our ground team to meet the aircraft upon arrival. We thank you for your cooperation. No one clapped. The only sound was the low hum of the engines and the occasional ding from passengers checking their phones, refreshing the feed. Celine shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her fingers tapped rhythmically on her thigh, a habit she'd had since high school debates. When she felt cornered, she'd talk faster, spin the narrative. But this wasn't a stage she could control. Jessa, the girl with the pink hair, spoke to the camera again, not loud, but just audible. "You're watching it unfold live. A woman in chronic pain had her medication destroyed. By her sister. This isn't fiction. This is what gaslighting looks like on a plane." The comment section on her screen raced so fast it blurred. Hearts floated up the side like confetti. Some of them had typed my name. Others simply said, "Believe her." I didn't need them to believe me. I just needed them to see her. Celine turned to me again, more urgently this time. "You know how this looks. Don't do this. Please." "I'm not doing anything," I replied evenly. "I'm just not erasing myself anymore." That shut her up. Minerva, still seated upright and watchful, glanced over. Her nod was barely perceptible, but it held weight. Then, I finally turned to Celine, looked her straight in the eye, and said the thing I'd been holding in for far too long. "You built a whole world where I was always the problem, where every bruise, every symptom, every flare-up was me being fragile, emotional, needy." She blinked rapidly. "But I'm still here," I continued, my voice steady. "I'm still breathing. I still exist." The lines around her mouth hardened. Her hand reached up, almost instinctively, to tuck her hair behind her ear. The move was empty, mechanical. "You think this fixes anything?" she said. "You think strangers online get to rewrite what our family went through?" "No," I said. "They're not rewriting anything. They're just watching the version you never wanted them to see." She looked like she might cry again, but not because she was sad, because she was caught, and she knew it. Sarah reappeared at the front of the cabin, this time with a different tone in her voice, one that wasn't just professional, but procedural. "The captain has filed an incident report," she said quietly. "Security and medical personnel will meet us upon landing. You may remain seated, but please prepare to speak with the crew." Her eyes landed on Celine for a beat too long. Celine gave a small nod. just enough to acknowledge she had heard. She didn't say another word. I leaned back in my seat, the pressure in my spine flaring again, reminding me that the cost of this moment was steep, but it was worth it, every second. Because for the first time, the narrative wasn't hers. The weight of what she'd done couldn't be hidden behind a sob or a polished sentence. It had been caught, in data logs, in videos, in voices that weren't mine. She couldn't explain it away, and the world wasn't listening to her anymore. This wasn't revenge, it was release. Celine muttered something under her breath, just barely loud enough for me to hear. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. Her hands were trembling in her lap, and her breath came in shallow pulls, like she was trying to stay upright while her world crumbled. That look she'd mastered all her life, the practiced calm, the media-ready grin, it was gone, replaced by something raw and far less polished. A crew member appeared at my elbow with a clipboard. "Ms. Maris," she said, her voice neutral, "we need your statement for the captain's log. It's voluntary, but it helps our crew file the formal report with ground personnel." I didn't hesitate. I reached for the pen, signed my name, printed it underneath. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. "We'll divert to Denver," she said, glancing toward the cockpit. "Legal and medical teams will meet us on the ground." Behind her, I heard a passenger whisper, "Good!" Someone else muttered, "Finally." It was subtle, but it was happening. The passengers weren't just passive anymore. They were watching her, judging her. She wasn't the hero of the scene anymore. She wasn't even the narrator. The cabin had turned. Jessa, still holding her phone in livestream mode, turned slightly toward the aisle. "I just want to remind everyone watching," she said calmly, "that this woman," she tilted the camera discreetly toward Celine, "is a public advocate. Board member of 2 nonprofits, featured in Forbes' Women of Influence list last year. Her name is Celine Artis." Celine's head jerked toward her. "You're doxing me now?" "I'm quoting your own website," Jessa replied, unfazed. "You posted it." A man in first class leaned back toward the coach section. "She should be banned from flying." "You destroy someone's meds. You don't get to act like a victim," a woman added behind him. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. That's when Minerva stood up again, steady and composed as ever. She wasn't waving her phone this time. She simply looked at the nearest attendant and said, "When we land, I'd like to speak to the captain directly. I've got footage. It's clear." And I was watching her body language the entire time. Sarah nodded. "We'll make that happen, ma'am." Minerva turned to me and added, "It wasn't just the act. It was the intent." She smiled when she dropped it. Celine scoffed. "You misread it. It was stress." Sarah took Minerva's phone, played a short clip, and frowned. "That's not stress," she said. "That's deliberate destruction of medical property." The words hung in the air, heavier than I expected. Deliberate destruction. It was no longer just a family matter. It was no longer between sisters. It had crossed a legal line. But what came next was the part I didn't expect. Not so soon, at least. "Wait a second," a voice said from behind. It was a man with graying temples, holding up his own phone. "This article says Celine Artis is the sole beneficiary of her sister's life insurance policy." My stomach clenched. Celine turned beet red. "That's outdated," she snapped. "It's not even—" "I changed it last month," I said clearly. "She just didn't know." A hush fell again. That single detail, paired with everything else, changed the tone in the room entirely. Jessa murmured into her stream, "This just turned into something darker." I didn't want to think about that part. Not here, not now. But I also knew how it looked, and it wasn't good for her. Celine sank into her seat. She looked smaller now, diminished, like the weight of every story she'd twisted had finally landed on her chest. Then the intercom pinged. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice returned, "due to onboard medical and legal circumstances, this flight will divert to Denver International. We ask for your patience as we coordinate with ground teams. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for descent. And just like that, the final shift occurred. People weren't whispering anymore. They were openly watching her, some with disdain, some with disbelief, all with the knowledge that they'd witnessed something real and ugly. Celine didn't move. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She just sat there, frozen. And me? I exhaled, slowly. Not because I'd won, but because I could finally breathe without her shadow blocking the air. As the aircraft's wheels kissed the runway, a shudder rippled through the cabin, one that had less to do with the landing gear and more with the tension that had settled in the air like thick fog. The applause was hesitant, uneven, not celebratory, just relieved. I didn't join in. I couldn't. My joints had stiffened to the point of locking. The pain had traveled into my hips and knees, a dull, relentless throb that made my legs feel like they'd been carved from iron and left out in the cold. I clutched the armrest and focused on my breath. In, out. Steady. But my mind was crystal clear. Across from me, Celine sat rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face pale and unreadable. The transformation from composed PR queen to cornered defendant had taken less than an hour, but the damage was done. The cabin had seen, heard, judged, and now we were on the ground. The seatbelt sign chimed off, but no one moved. The front door hadn't opened yet. The curtain remained drawn. Then came the shift. Footsteps, a metallic click. Then a uniformed woman stepped on board with a pair of EMTs behind her. One of them, a nurse in her 40s with calm eyes, approached me first. "Ms. Maris?" she asked gently. "Yes," I managed. "We received a medical alert during flight. You were flagged for urgent assessment." I nodded, swallowing past the tightness in my throat. My voice came out rough. "My medication was destroyed in the air. I'm having a flare." She crouched to eye level, already pulling on gloves. "We're going to check your vitals now. You'll be escorted for full evaluation." Behind her, Celine stood up, voice dripping with practiced concern. "I'm her sister. I can help explain." The security officer who had boarded beside the EMTs stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "you are not the patient. Please step back." Celine opened her mouth, but the nurse cut in without even looking at her. "We need space," she said. "Let's keep it professional." It wasn't just a medical procedure now. It was protocol, and she no longer had a seat at the table. I let them work. Blood pressure cuff, oxygen check, pupil response. My heart was fast, but steady. The EMT whispered something to the security guard, and within seconds, the captain himself stepped on board. He walked with the weight of authority. A man in command, not just of the aircraft, but now of a public incident. He approached Celine directly. "Ms. Ardis," he said evenly, "you'll be contacted by federal authorities regarding the destruction of medical property. You are not cleared to exit the airport at this time." Her jaw tightened. "I didn't mean for it to—" He raised his hand. "I'm not the one you'll be speaking to." From the gate window, I could see press already gathering. Someone had tipped off the media. Maybe it was the live stream, maybe a passenger. It didn't matter. The consequences had already boarded this flight. As Celine was escorted toward the forward galley for processing, someone in the cabin recorded her. I saw the phone raised discreetly, the red dot blinking. "Finally," someone whispered near the rear. The wheelchair arrived a minute later. I was helped gently into it, my legs throbbing with resistance. The nurse asked if I wanted to be transported all the way to the ambulance bay. "No," I said. "I want to stand." She blinked. "You're in no shape to—" "I want to walk out. Just a little, 5 feet. Then I'll sit, please." She looked at me for a moment, then nodded. They steadied me on either side, and slowly, painfully, I stood. The flashbulbs caught it. I didn't care, because that was the moment I reclaimed what had been taken from me for years. Not just autonomy, not just credibility, but the simple right to exist without someone else rewriting my story. I took 4 steps, awkward, shaking, but mine. Then I turned to Minerva, who stood just inside the cabin, her arms crossed gently over her chest. "Thank you," I said, "for seeing me." She smiled, a slow, knowing curve. "Some of us don't forget how to look." The security officer guided me toward the bridge, and as I passed the row where Celine now sat, flanked by uniformed staff, she turned her head sharply. Her eyes met mine for the first time since the incident. "Are you happy now?" she asked in a whisper only I could hear. I didn't stop, didn't reply, just walked, because for once I wasn't answering to her anymore. A week later, I found myself seated beneath a banner that read, "Invisible Illness and Institutional Bias, a Public Conversation." It hung modestly over the panel stage at the University of California Medical Center, nothing glossy or overly polished, just white fabric with bold navy letters. But it carried more weight than most headlines I'd seen that year. I wasn't nervous, at least not in the way I used to be. My hands weren't shaking, my mouth wasn't dry. I wasn't bracing for someone to question my pain. I was just ready. They mic'd me up. The panel was already live, streamed across the hospital's website, and simulcast on 3 advocacy pages that had picked up my story. Over 200,000 people were watching. I didn't know their names, didn't need to. I just knew I wasn't speaking into a void. When the moderator asked me to open the discussion, I took a slow breath, then spoke. "I used to think I had to be believed to survive," I began. "That if the people closest to me, my sister, my mother, my teachers, didn't believe my illness was real, then maybe it wasn't. I thought their trust validated my experience." I glanced down, then back up. I was wrong. The room didn't stir. No one reached for their phone or cleared their throat. They were listening. "I'm not angry," I continued. "Not anymore, not even at her. I'm angry that I built my sense of safety around someone else's approval, that I spent years trying to act healthy enough to earn credibility, instead of just being sick and needing help." A pause. That kind of pretending doesn't just wear you down, it erases you, bit by bit. Minerva sat in the front row, arms folded across her chest, a proud half-smile resting on her face. I didn't need her to nod. Her presence was enough. There was applause when I finished, but I didn't let it settle too long. The discussion moved forward. Doctors, advocates, legal experts weighing in. Still, the moderator kept circling back to what had happened on that plane. The clip of Celine, caught mid-gesture at the galley, had now become an emblem on social media. Dozens of captions had followed it. "When ableism wears pearls. PR-trained gaslighting in real time. Believe the quiet one." Celine didn't show up to the panel. She hadn't spoken publicly since the incident, except through her attorney. Her PR firm quietly dropped her days after the footage went viral. The statement they released was lukewarm at best. Ms. Artis deeply regrets the misunderstanding and respects the dignity of all people living with chronic conditions. A journalist commented on air that same day. "Silence is louder when guilt stays in the room it walked out of." It stuck with me, not as triumph, but as truth. They asked me to close the panel with any final words. I hesitated, then said, "Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who work hardest to redefine your story. That doesn't make them evil, it makes them dangerous." Later, in the lobby, one of the tech team members played a clip that had surfaced from the flight. It wasn't part of the main footage. It had been recorded from several rows back. A child's voice, soft and curious, asked her mother, "Why would someone throw away her medicine if she's hurting?" I didn't remember hearing it at the time. I'd been too focused on staying conscious, staying composed. But hearing it now, that tiny question rang louder than any speech I could have written, because that was the whole story. Outside, the wind was sharp, tinged with ocean salt and car exhaust. I stepped through the sliding doors of the medical center, my coat pulled tight around my ribs. The cold didn't bite the way it used to. I wasn't flinching at every sound or glance. A woman passed by and smiled, her toddler tugging at her sleeve. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly. I didn't know her, but she said it like it mattered. I didn't answer out of habit. I didn't soften my truth to make it palatable. "I feel seen," I said. "That's new." She smiled wider and walked on. Behind me, the glass doors hissed closed. Sometimes the people who claim to protect you are the very ones holding the scissors behind your back. This wasn't just about a sister throwing away medication. It was about rewriting the narrative, reclaiming a voice, and realizing that justice doesn't always come with sirens. Sometimes it comes in silence. Have you ever had to choose between peace and being believed? Let me know your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that reveal what really happens behind closed doors.